Divergent effects of broadband internet expansion on adolescent educational outcomes. We're delighted to have Professor Pablo Gracia, and those of you online don't see him yet, but you will shortly, with us today to discuss how internet coverage and expansion impacts student educational performance. Pablo Gracia is a professor in sociology at Trinity College Dublin. Professor Gracia's research lies at the intersection of families and inequalities and concerns particularly with how family inequalities relate to societal processes shaping parents' and children's daily lives and well-being. And for quite a few years, Pablo has been looking at this in relation to emerging digital technologies. Next year, I found that extremely exciting, he will be starting his research on his new ERC-funded research project that looks at digital time use, adolescent well-being, and social inequalities. Plug-in, he will be looking for some cool postdocs to work on that project. I think he'll be advertising in the next couple of months to start in September 2024. So I know we've got loads of talented people. Stay if we have options for you, but have fun. There's another cool opportunity. The presentation will run for about 30 to 40 minutes, followed by discussion Q&A at the end. If you're joining us online, please put your questions into the Q&A box or raise your hand if you would wish to ask on camera. So we're very happy to facilitate that for those of you who would like to do that. If you are typing in the Q&A box, I will read out the questions and I'll make sure that we take some intermit some questions from the room, some questions from online. Those of you in the room, please save your questions until the end, and Pablo will answer them after the talk. For your awareness, this event is being recorded and will be posted on the website following the event. Thank you very much. It's great to have you, Pablo, and over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Katia, for the introduction, for the great introduction and the invitation. So as you see, that's the title of the presentation, Digital Divides, Divergent Effects of Broadband Internet Expansion on Adolescent Educational Outcomes. It's such a pleasure to be here. So I will try to talk not too much so that there is space for a Q&A later. I think I have to be here. So that's the broad question that I will be talking about today is the following. So essentially, I wanna discuss with you how broadband internet expansion is influencing adolescent well-being, but in particular, I'm going to be talking about a study that focuses on adolescent educational outcomes. Okay. So first of all, and then Kathy already did this introduction. So this is framed partly in relation to some projects I'm involved now. So I'm involved in this very cool project. The PI is from Denmark. It's a large EU project called Digimatics. We are doing very interesting interdisciplinary stuff. And in Ireland, I'm leading the group. So basically trying to understand how adolescents' digital engagement is related to their well-being. So we are combining both secondary data similar to Andy's work, for example, also using longitudinal data and seeing how this differs by gender, these adolescents' digital engagement and well-being by gender, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, etc. But we are also collecting our data. So this project is very exciting because actually it's linked to the ERC that is starting in September 24. Again, if you are interested in following up, or maybe you are doing your master's or PhD right now, so there would be some openings coming up in the next year or two. So just keep an eye if you are interested. What I'm going to present today, it's less about the digital engagement, but it's more about something that is very important, namely the infrastructure. So what happens when there is an expansion of internet? So when the quality and the speed and the availability of internet becomes much more salient in the community where you are living. So first of all, let me say this is joint work with this great, amazing PhD researcher from Norway, Erlend Nordrum. You know that in Norway you have very high quality registry data, so we are benefiting from that. And Erlend is the leading author, so I'm here the co-author, but I'm very happy also to say that you can look at the paper. So you have here the preprint that we have in OSF if you want to know more about the paper. Okay, the paper has some. It's in the process of review, so it seems to be accepted already. Minor revisions, but you can attack it. You can destroy the paper. Feel free for that because we want to expand this research, and we also want to hear your critical comments on this paper, but also on following up versions of the paper. So that's the title: Broadband Internet Expansion Impacts on Adolescent Academic Outcomes. And we are particularly interested in looking at heterogeneous effects, so different effects across the population. So what are our research questions? So we have two main research questions. The first research question is how the expansion of broadband internet that happened in this specific case in Norway about 2 decades ago, early 21st century, impacted the outcomes, the performance of adolescents in secondary school, in their graduation rates. But particularly, as I said, our second key question is to try to understand the degree to which different groups from the population, individuals, young people from different demographic characteristics, they are equally affected or not by this expansion of broadband internet. Let me talk a little bit about the background that motivates our study. The majority of research that we have been looking at in terms of broadband internet expansion and how this is related to adolescent outcomes is generally descriptive and based on cross-sectional data that doesn't benefit from changes over time, okay? So as several of you could be aware of, so there are different ways by which we can tease out causality. Of course, always causality is very complex in the social sciences, but some studies have been trying to identify causality by looking at changes over time, okay? So for example, when there is an exogenous effects, such as, for example, the introduction of broadband internet in different areas, for example, researchers were trying to understand whether those regions, for example, or in those contexts where broadband internet was expanding more, were also associated with a specific different outcomes, for example, in terms of adolescent well-being. So we have, in our literature review, identified 3 studies that are very strong. They have what we call a causal effect. So they are trying to understand how broadband internet expansion impacts adolescent outcomes. These studies are interesting, but most of them, well, the 3 of them that we identify are from the English-speaking context, 2 from the US, from some regions from the US, 1 from the UK. And they also have relatively mixed results, okay? So even if they found that more disadvantaged groups, interestingly, were more harmed by this expansion of internet. So these studies had some limitations, or they are having some shortcomings that we are trying to contribute to in our paper. So the first contribution is that we are looking at the Norwegian case. The Norwegian case, of course, being also a high-income Western country, is radically or strongly different in some respects with the US or the UK. So Norway is well known for being a country with lower social inequalities. It's also a country where education has not been universalized for many years, but is also quite generous in terms of including inclusiveness in the educational system. It's also a country that, compared to the UK and particularly the US, has also higher social mobility, okay? So it's interesting to look at this context, not only from an inequality perspective, but also from a cultural perspective. So the Norwegian case, again, is still a high-income country, but it has differences in terms of the cultural and policy framework. The second important thing is that, compared to these other studies, we are using Norwegian administrative data, from all the population. So this has a lot of advantages because we have information on every single individual, adolescents, and this allows us to look at different groups of the population with very high precision. And also methodologically, and I will go more into detail here, we are claiming that even if previous studies, they did a good job in terms of looking at regional differences, they were not holding constant the family. Okay, because many of these studies, they look at whether a region, for example, or a municipality gets internet before compared to another, and then they compare how adolescents or families are doing. But the problem is that they don't look at the family context. We know that much of the differences happen at the level of the family. And what we do is we compare siblings. Okay, I will be talking more about the methodology, and we are able to tease out or to control for an observed heterogeneity, not only at the level of the school or the level of the municipality, but also within the family, with family siblings fixed effects. Also, a third contribution is that we are looking at this problem from a rather intersectional approach. So we are looking mostly at gender, social class, as well as migrant status, which is a proxy of ethnicity and race, the best proxy that we can find. And this is also important because there is a lot of literature suggesting that different groups of the population might be different exposed to the benefits or potential harms of internet expansion. Okay, so that's what we claim to be our contribution. Let's think theoretically, how can the expansion of internet impact adolescent outcomes? Of course, in the media and in some research, there are some claims that could tell us that with the expansion of internet, some problems could arise among young people, okay? So even if we are talking about the early expansion of high-speed broadband coverage, you could argue that if you start to get better internet, you could easily get more distracted as an adolescent, for example. You have the possibility to watch more Netflix shows. Well, I believe in the early 2000s, Netflix didn't exist, but you can watch certain videos. You can be more easily distracted, okay? And perhaps you spend less time also on studying or doing other things. Distraction is one aspect, so less study time. Other studies have been talking about time displacement, okay? So if you, on the one hand, are spending much more time watching internet because you have better quality internet and you start to watch many more things, to be more distracted, you could potentially spend less time on perhaps sleeping. There is actually some interesting research showing a decrease in sleeping time with expansion of internet among adults, but also young people. You could maybe do less sport, of course, less study, and this could be negative for your educational performance. Of course, even if internet addiction or game addiction affects a small percentage of the population, we could also argue that for some groups of the population, maybe the possibility to using internet of high speed might maybe lead people to do more betting, maybe engage in more gaming activities that could be potentially detrimental, or gaming of video games, more standard video games, okay? So this is, if you want, in a nutshell, the negative side of the story. But you could, and there is also good theories about digital opportunities, think of a more positive framework. With the expansion of the internet, individuals, young people could have access to computers that give you more information. You can easily go to Wikipedia. You can easily have internet that is much more efficient to study, and you could benefit from that as a student, okay? Another thing is that when the expansion of internet is happening, it is not only you, but or your family, but also people around your community are also more likely to actually have access to internet. So this could mean that students, for example, could work together, they could study, they could access new resources that they didn't have access to that easily, okay? I will be talking more later on in terms of what this expansion looked like. So maybe those that are a bit more senior maybe remember what it meant, for example, using a digital device while your parents maybe were using the phone, so you couldn't use the internet, and also the difference between being able to download a lot of pictures, videos, and so on, or do streaming with a high-speed internet compared to a lower. So there is an important change in the nature of the efficiency of how internet was working. Okay, but there are these two potential aspects that we can hypothesize for the global effects. Now, what about the heterogeneous effects? So there are different theories that have been developed in terms of heterogeneity of digital divides, okay? I'm sure that almost all of you are here familiar with the idea of the digital divides. I'm gonna go here very, very fast, okay? Because I was preparing this talk yesterday for the people that know 1% of what you know about the digital divides, okay? But if you are familiar with this literature, you remember perhaps that there are these 3 levels of digital divides that the scholars have been talking about. So most of the relevant aspects of the digital divides literature that we will be discussing today, okay, it's more related to what we call access, okay? So this was the early theories about the digital divides that were talking about the importance of having infrastructures, right? So access is important. So if you don't have a tablet, if I don't have a computer, if we don't have electronic devices, we cannot, of course, have access to the internet. We cannot use technology, okay? It's important to understand that there is literature on the importance of access or coverage. We know, of course, that older individuals tend to be less likely to be users compared to young individuals, but also we know that there is a very strong rural-urban divide, not to mention across countries. In some countries, almost everyone has access to internet in their community compared to other countries, for example, if you compare global north to global south, okay? So it's very important to consider the aspect of access as a divide. If you don't have access, you cannot use technologies and you cannot benefit from them or potentially be harmed by them. This is also not a simple binary when we talk about access. How many of you, for example, have you managed that you go to a certain place, you have your mobile phone, but your connectivity is very bad? Or sometimes many people, and this affects particularly poorer people in poorer countries, you might have a phone, but maybe you will not have a card, for example, or a contract that allows you to have high quality internet. So access is more than a divide, and this is partly what we are incorporating in our study. It's not the same to be in a place with access to pretty affordable, high quality internet compared to using the old dial internet that is slower and poorer quality, okay? This is the first divide. But of course, as you can imagine, scholars started to think about not so much only whether you have access, but also how you are using these technologies, okay? Because people could have the same type of technologies, but they could use them in completely different ways, not only in the frequency that they use them, but in the types of activities that they are engaging with digital technologies, but also the types of skills that young people might have. For example, in terms of ICT skills, are also very important in order to maximize opportunities and minimize potential harm associated with the digital. Okay. And it's also important here, and here I'm referring to the last book by Helsper, but others have been talking about it, like Sonia Livingston as well. So when we talk about digital skills, and again, this is not something that we study specifically, but only indirectly in our study, it's also relevant to think as digital literacy, not only in terms of programming and all these kind of skills that are very important for your life chances in post-industrial digitalized societies, but also your ability to navigate the social media world, right? So having digital literacy is also knowing the risks, for example, that can be associated with posting something, knowing how to navigate in social media context, in private groups. All this is also digital literacy. It's your awareness and your ability to be able to reduce harm and maximize opportunities or well-being, okay? Second, digital divides more related to skills and ICT. And of course, the third one, and that is fundamental, is the outcomes, okay? So increasingly, scholars already for the last decades actually have been looking not only at access or coverage, but also, and not only about the digital skills and engagement, but what are the returns of these, okay? And there is a lot of research here. So Andy has been working a lot in this area, or others looking at the association between digital engagement and well-being. So, for example, in Andy's work is very clear that the effects are sometimes magnified, but also the effects of digital engagement might differ across the population. So, for example, here I'm stressing some recent work, particularly with Melissa Bogner, who is a PhD in Trinity, where we find differences between high and low SES groups in terms of the association between digital engagement and well-being, okay? So there is interesting research there and scholarship looking at differential effects. So we could hypothesize that different groups of the population are differently affected by their digital engagement or access, in terms of their outcomes, their well-being. Most of the literature on digital divides, so again, here I'm focusing on one author, Jan van Dijk. Probably you are familiar with this work. There are many people who have been working in this direction. Most of this research has been claiming that new technologies are amplifying inequalities, okay? So for example, here, just to summarize what I was presenting before, we have the first level divide, which is more about access. Then you have skills or usage, which is the second level divide. But we are particularly interested in the outcomes, okay? So this is more the broader picture of Jan van Dijk, the third level, which is more the outcomes. in our study, we are looking at education, okay? So if you look at the digital divides literature, so it seems that what you should expect is a bad picture for groups of the society that tend to be more disadvantaged, okay? So the idea here is that more privileged groups at different levels, they might be more able to maximize the opportunities of technologies in different ways, okay? And if this is true, you should expect, first of all, that high SES, richer families with more access to both symbolic and material resources, they might be more able to nurture their kids, help them, for example, with using technologies when there is an expansion of technology and so on and so forth. And the other way around for more disadvantaged, poorer families, families with less resources could be more harmed by the expansion of the internet. In terms of gender, even if gender is tricky, because in some aspects you see inequalities affecting, for example, in the binary sense, boys, and in others you see inequalities affecting more girls, you could think that there might be a reproduction of gender inequalities. The same by ethnicity or race, right? So if the online and the offline world are interconnected, and certain groups of the population, for example, in a racially stratified or ethnically stratified society, are less likely to benefit from certain opportunities, you might think that perhaps these groups could be even further excluded or discriminated, okay? And what about the students? Well, it could be that the students who are more likely to benefit academically from the resources that they have or because of their skills, it could be that they could use technologies in a more student-oriented fashion, and those students that maybe do worse, they might be more likely to engage in activities that are less academic because they are, in any case, less likely to benefit from academic participation because they are doing less well in the educational system, okay? This could be a scenario, but we could also think of a potential equalization, okay? First of all, it could be that in less advantaged families, because they lack the resources at home, it could be that with the expansion of the internet, these families, these kids could compensate for this lack of resources at home, for example. It could be that internet expansion is reducing inequalities. So in terms of gender, it could be, again, that if, for example, girls, we know that they are more likely to be harmed in terms of internalizing processes, or boys, for example, in terms of externalizing behavior. It could be that certain gendered patterns are altered because of the opportunities of the digital world, okay? So for gender, the story is a bit more complex, but similar equalization could be for ethnic and racial minorities, okay? So imagine, for example, a first or a second generation migrant coming into Norway, for example, who doesn't know Norwegian. The fact that there is internet available could be positive for this kid whose parents perhaps don't know that well the Norwegian language, and this could be positive for them, okay? The same could be for lower achieving students. So we know that students who get worse grades or that are more disadvantaged in education, they might have perhaps some disabilities, they might have some particular learning processes that maybe are less efficient within the standard system. Perhaps internet could give them more potential, okay? Yeah, so this is kind of, I'm afraid that I don't want to show you that basically everything can happen, but I hope that with this with this background that I have given you, so what I want to say is that the story that inequalities are going to increase is not very clear, okay? And we can summarize that both, because there is very little research on that, so we don't know the answer to that, and I hope that you are very excited to see what's happening later. But the global effects could go in different directions, so we could expect both positive or negative global effects, or no change at all, because in the end, internet doesn't change much. And we could expect differences across groups of the population because different demographic groups have unequal access to resources, but it's not entirely clear or very tautological in what direction it would be. It is true that there is a lot of research on digital divides, and digital inequalities are there and are very clear, but it could be that this expansion of internet that has never been studied in the way that we do opens also certain opportunities, okay? So all this background has been in order to generate expectations. So now you want to see what's happening in the reality, okay? Let me talk a little bit about our method, okay? So we have very, very interesting data here. If you look at here at this map, what we see is the expansion of broadband internet coverage between 2002 and 2007. Okay, in this period, the Norwegian government developed this policy in order to make sure that everyone would have high-speed access to high-speed internet. Okay, how did they do this program? They did that through all these 357 municipalities. Okay. And in a gradual phase period, so they were making sure that all these people from these municipalities would have access to the internet. Okay, you see that on your left-hand side, the map is very green. Okay, this means that less than 1 out of 4 people, less than 25% of people had access to the broadband. Compared to on your right-hand side, the 2007. So there was a change from 6% of coverage, internet coverage in 2002 up to 85%. Okay, so during this period, different municipalities were having increasing access to broadband internet. The interesting thing of this data is that even if it was not entirely random, but we can control for that, this expansion, there were many municipalities, and we also could look at siblings who were graduating in different moments. So imagine, for example, a sibling, you know, your older sibling, for example, is graduating in 2004, for example, in one municipality, okay? But perhaps you are graduating in the same municipality, in the same school, but in 2006 or 2007, in a context where you have higher chances to have access to high-speed internet. And what we are going to do in the results I'm going to show you, what we are going to do is we are going to analyze and examine whether these different exposure to internet matters in terms of your educational performance. So this is how the data look like. We have information, administrative data, every single student from the population, and we merge these with the Norwegian Communication Authority, the NCOM, okay? So these are data administrative. The first ones are micro level, so of individuals. The second one is municipality level data, okay? Why municipality level data? For 2 reasons. First, the policy was at the municipal level. And second, this is the smaller level unit that we can have, okay? But still, 357 municipalities and a lot of changes over time. We use data from 2002 to 2007, which is this period of change. We focus on adolescents that were turning 16 during their graduation. And also we make sure that siblings were graduating from the same school, okay? We have over 100,000 students after this selection. So we have 2 dependent or outcome variables. One is GPA for simplicity or analysis purposes. So we convert this into a 0 to 100. So all the results that I will be showing you, they can be interpreted as percentage change. But also we look at different academic subjects more as robustness, additional changes, okay? The main explanatory variable, again, is at the municipality level, is broadband coverage. And we look at the proportion of households in the municipality with internet connection of at least 256 kbps download speed, okay? So again, the percentage, the proportion of households that in a specific day of observation or year or month of observation were having this high-speed internet compared to the previous slower and lower quality internet. Okay, so we are comparing 4 groups: gender, as in the census, differentiating between boys and girls, as it is defined in the census; parental education, 3 levels; migration status. We do 4 groups. We are basically following previous Norwegian literature in terms of migration status. And then finally, we also look at educational performance. So students that are at 5 different levels, students that are doing better compared to those that are in lower quintiles. So First of all, the nature of the data allows us to engage with a quasi-experimental design, okay? Because even if the expansion of internet was not completely random, we have enough variation in our data in order to look at these changes of expansion of coverage of internet during this period, okay? So I want to stress here, I don't know if you are familiar with these sibling fixed effects models, okay? So the advantage of a sibling fixed effect model is that you not only hold constant, like in other fixed effects, the level of the municipality and the school, okay? So yes, schools differ in hundreds of factors. Yes, municipalities differ. Certain municipalities that might have early access to internet, they might also be richer or more urban, and this could be also associated with adolescent outcomes, right? We are not only holding this constant, but the contribution at the empirical level, besides the rich data that we have, is that we are also holding constant a lot of variation that happens within the family. This is genetics, but this is a lot of environment. So we are taking this, holding this constant, and this allows us to be more able to understand whether the effect, the association between expansion and outcomes is causal, okay? Of course, there is a lot of unobserved heterogeneity still, even if we hope that we are doing better than, or at least we are trying to be more cautious in terms of causality. We still add some controls like child's birth cohort, the order in the family. We know that older siblings tend to do better in education compared to younger, and also mother's age at birth. So the correlation between mother's age at birth and child's birth cohort is quite low, so that there is not multicollinearity for those that are interested. Of course, there are some issues that we cannot control for, but we are doing our best, and we don't want to over control our models, okay? So for those that are more into formulas, geeks, formulas, and so on, this is how things look like. Very simple. We are comparing one sibling with another, okay? So holding constant for all the things that I was talking about. I want to compare, for example, a sibling who graduated in 2005 to a sibling graduating in 2003. And for this, you have a different coverage, okay? But then we are comparing groups. So it's very simple. We are simply using the controls that I'm mentioning and so on. We are also comparing different groups with different categories within the same group, okay? So that's more the formal modeling, but I hope that before things were clear also before in the explanation. So let's go. Let me present the results that we have. I'm going to be presenting always the same types of analysis. So the sibling fixed effects for different groups of the population. So the first thing that we see here is that there was a small improvement of adolescents' educational performance with the expansion of internet, okay? So this is, the average effect is very small. It's even not statistically significant with such large sample, okay? So we're talking of less than 1% improvement with the expansion of internet. That's how you would interpret that, okay? So even if the effects were small, what we see here is that, first of all, for boys, the positive effect, even if very small for the general population, was 3 times larger than for girls, okay? So boys benefited a bit, and girls don't seem to benefit on average, okay? It's 1% of increase, okay? So this is a small improvement, but you see also these gender patterns that you are going to see later in the analysis, okay? 1%, a bit more than 1% for boys, very small, much smaller, 3 times smaller for girls. Here we already see a quite interesting result that also in the robustness checks, it was very clear. We do see that parental education matters, but parental education matters in intersection with gender. And here, one of the most interesting results that we find deals with the fact that when we look at the level of education, we don't see much of a story. We see not even a U-shaped story, because there are no clear average differences. But it's very interesting that when you look at gender, very different patterns may emerge. So for the less educated, so kids or adolescents with less educated parents, parents with compulsory education, boys were strongly benefited. This is almost 1/3 of a standard deviation, so it's a pretty relevant improvement in terms of how they are doing. But for girls whose parents had lower educational resources, the opposite happened. Okay, so again, in our study, and I wanna hear more from you. We in this study are not testing mechanisms, but this is something that we want to dig better, okay, more into detail in the future. We don't see much of difference for higher levels of education, okay? So different patterns by gender interacting with education. We also find, again, you can call it an equalization effect, but the equalization effect here for the whole sample is basically telling you that with the expansion of internet, students who were doing worse, they were benefiting, okay? So this is a bit less than 3%, is 1/6 of a standard deviation, is not a lot, but you see an improvement for students that were doing worse. In the group, the 20% that are more disadvantaged in grades, in GPA. Interestingly, students that were doing well, even if the change is not as pronounced or less pronounced than for those that were doing worse, they are reducing their performance. Okay, so it's a kind of an equalization pattern here. So those that were doing worse improve. Those the better students or students with the higher grades do a bit worse. And this is particularly true for boys. Again, so more or less 1/3 of a standard deviation, 5% improvement in GPA. It's not little, you know. It's change. It's a quite relevant change in their performance. And again, only for boys, you see that the boys that get better grades, they are doing worse with expansion of internet. So a bit of reduction in the extremes, particularly. You see that in the middle, students that are more average in terms of grades, they don't change that much. It seems to be that these patterns, again, more pronounced for boys because boys show more variation than girls. They seem to happen more in the lower levels of education. Okay, so for tertiary education, you see some less of these differences. But it's also interesting that, so basically, parental education doesn't play that much of a role here. But if you remember, the results for low education are very similar to the results for lower education from your parents. Being in a less educated family are quite similar to the results for lower achieving students. Okay, are we following here? Yes, good. We also explored, this was more an explorative analysis. We also explored the degree to which the results were different across subjects. For the average effects, you don't see much of differences. So you see that natural sciences, it's about 1% increase, not much of a difference. And then you see here a bit of mixed results. So again, boys show more variation than girls, more improvement, as we saw already. And the subjects where they see improvements is they are quite diverse. There is art and crafts. So I don't know if you have thought that this would be benefiting from the internet, but then you have interesting things such as mathematics or language. Okay, so we don't really know what's going on there. You know, I think it's pretty mixed. It doesn't seem that there is a very clear pattern here, but it's important to explore that. For migration status, we see some interesting patterns, even if, of course, for the migrant minority groups, the sample size is pretty small, okay? We see that, if you remember, girls in less educated families, they were doing worse. But what we see is that for girls, we see some pattern, namely that those from non-Western groups, girls are more likely to see improvements with internet. But for boys, we see a quite different pattern. So we don't see many clear advancement progress. So actually, boys are doing worse for the non-Western groups. Okay. So you see, for example, for boys that there is a change for those whose parents are born in Norway, but the change is not as pronounced as you see for girls here. Okay, so of course these results, as you see with the confidence intervals, they refer to small groups. Okay, so we are less confident about these results, but the magnitude is quite high. But again, both the results for academic subjects and for migrant status, they would deserve a little bit more attention. But it's interesting that we see this interaction, or this potential interaction between gender and migrant status for girls that you don't see, or you see in a different direction when you look at educational inequalities. So I'm gonna conclude mostly summarizing the results, and I look forward to see your vision on the paper. So overall, the story for the general population is that there is no change. There is a very small, statistically not significant, not relevant improvement in terms of academic performance with the expansion of the internet. But you see in the results, and I hope that you believe that, and I can persuade you of that different groups of the population are quite sharply, differently influenced by this expansion of the internet. So first of all, even if results or the magnitude of the effects were small, boys were benefiting 3 times more than girls. Second, particularly for boys, those in families that have less access to education and boys who were doing worse, they were benefiting by about 5% in their improvement in terms of GPA. Okay, so this is 1/3 of a standard deviation. It's a pretty relevant improvement. Okay, a very different pattern emerges for girls. Girls in the less educated groups, they were significantly doing worse. So there is a clear intersection there that we have to further explore. And you also see that the more privileged, particularly the high achieving students, particularly boys, they are doing a bit less well in terms of their education. Okay, so you see that those at the top are obtaining a bit worse grades, even if they are still doing significantly better than an average student after the expansion of the internet. And then for migration status, the patterns are a bit complex, but it seems that girls in some ethnic or racial minority groups that we use as a proxy as non-Western migrant status, it seems that in this group, we see for girls some improvement, even if, of course, the group, even if we have registry data, is relatively small and the results give us less confidence. Okay, so in short, we claim that looking at these problems from an intersectional perspective, comparing different groups is important because different groups of the population have a different exposure to the internet. But it seems that we don't see a very pessimistic background, particularly for boys. So here gender is important. We see that actually certain groups that have been traditionally excluded from education, at least in Norway at the beginning of the 21st century, were improving. So this is a bit different than the rhetoric of the digital divides, or it shows you, even if we cannot test mechanisms, a very different story. Okay, next steps, lots of that. So first of all, mechanisms. We are, of course, using registry data, particularly those who are qualitative researchers. You would say, hey, what's happening here, you know? Or even quantitative researchers who like to do mechanisms, as I do. Of course, we want to look at other outcomes. I was talking about it with Andy, for example. It could be that, you know, certain groups of the population do better in education, but maybe they do less well in terms of their physical or their mental health. And this is also a very interesting coming up type of line of research that we want to do exactly with the same data. So there are lots of interesting things that we want to work on for the next steps. And yes, I really look forward to hear your comments. Thank you. You have here the preprint.
I'll come to chair and keep an eye on the chat. So focus on that. Thank you very much for this brilliant presentation. Do we have any questions in the room? Grant?
No. Could we go back to figure 4 on those slides? That was your figure of the gender differences. Yeah. No, 4, not 3. Yeah. You look at the left-hand panels there, A and B there. What you're seeing, I wanted to propose a mechanism here. In fact, a methodological artifact. What you're seeing is the low end is getting higher and the high end is getting lower. That reminds me of regression toward the mean.
Okay.
So the good ones are getting slightly less good and the bad ones are
Yeah.
getting slightly better. And so that's a methodological artifact.
Mm,
And the middle isn't changing. That's
Yeah.
that's what that looks like classic, you might as well be measuring
Yeah.
heights of parents and children.
mm,
Tall parents have slightly shorter children. Short parents have slightly taller children, and the people in the middle don't change much.
Yeah. So we have even if the data are cross-sectional, because we observe it student once, we had data from 2002 to 2007, and the regression towards the same problem can emerge in any case here, right?
Yep.
Because I think I'm trying to remember how we measure the performance. Let me also say that the GPA and it's based on many exams. So I know that the regression towards
Numbers of exams
it doesn't matter. Yeah. So I'm just thinking, how can we control these with cross-sectional data?
I don't think you could control for that even with
Yeah.
time series data easily.
Yeah.
And just as a related thing, it's difficult. I had a similar thought, but it was difficult for me to understand that because are these models that are corrected for the sibling scores as well?
Yeah.
So it's without knowing what the uncorrected models look like, it's difficult to kind of,
Okay.
because it's possible that if you have like kind of an extension to it, what might be in the model actually is some aspect of some like very extremely high scoring sibling, and variability in that going in and being held at the average level in the model. But I'll shut up. I have a second.
Yeah, no, that's good. Just final reflections of here. It could be another reflection that we are having is that it could be that perhaps there is a kind of a compensation, but the reality is that we didn't see that grades were doing worse. We didn't see that grades were doing worse, right? I'm just thinking the degree to which maybe teachers were compensating. Yeah, but it's very difficult to do that. Please.
I have similar thoughts. So here in the UK, for example, you have a range of scores, and it doesn't really matter what the average is. So if everybody does better, everybody works harder. My kids are, doing GCSEs. If everybody works harder this year, and they do better than they did last year, everything will just be re-averaged back to the middle. So there'll be the bottom third and the top third and the middle third. So what you see, any changes you see will depend on how you're standardizing and on how those grades have already been standardized by the government before they've been given to you as well. So I don't know exactly how that works in Norway, but it will influence any differences you're trying to measure.
It is also important that here we are looking at any time between 2002 and 2007. So while it is true that in our head we're thinking, oh, there's an expansion of the internet, and in the end, what we are doing is using a very fine measure of differences. So it's basically a continuous variable between the moment in which the month where one sibling is graduating compared to the other. And I don't know if it's clear that there is a deliberate sort of teachers change in the grading, but definitely there is a randomness in students that are doing better.
I want to be
The British system, the marks are all nationally organized, and that may not be true in Norway.
No, it's not. That's at the level of the school.
We were thinking of.
That's these are GPA. These are also very objective exams because they are actually, I don't know if they are anonymized. I have to know that, but these are the final exams that allow you to graduate. So I don't think that teachers' bias is involved there.
But they could be harder one year and easier in the end. It's really difficult.
I know, but that's why we have a lot of years controlling for years for school, for municipalities, but still the regression towards the mean can affect.
Let me interject with a question from online, and then I know there are more questions from the room. So this is from Ellen Young. Thank you for the brilliant lecture, Dr. Garcia. May I ask, where did the internet coverage expansion mostly took place? In schools or children's houses? So how is it rolled out?
So the data that we have is at the level of the municipality. And so what we know is that actual access was very highly correlated with coverage. So it's a 0.95. So correlation, or 0.90 something. I don't know about the Norwegian context, and here it would be great if Erling would be around. But that's a very good question, the one that you read. So we have to know what happens in the schools. Definitely homes did have access to internet, but I have to investigate more about the school. So that's a very interesting question to look at. Yeah.
And then could you go back one slide?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Maybe
just
you
cut
click
it.
here. Yeah. Apologies.
Did I take over?
No, you can click. Yeah.
Okay. So, just two inferential things to think about as the work is peer reviewed. The first is that sometimes when you were talking about subgroup analysis, like the differences between boys and girls, you would say something like, and taking panel B 100% at face value, you would say something to the effect of the effect for boys is larger for girls, or it is, like, but that's not really what you can infer from that plot.
Right.
You can infer that the observed effect was not zero, or it differed in some way that you believe the 95% confidence interval or 90% confidence interval did not include zero for boys, but it did for girls. The difference in significance, statistical significance, is not the same as a significant difference. And so the plot at the bottom here, where boys are on one side of the zero line and girls are on the other, or vice versa, that is an example where the 95% confidence intervals don't overlap, and you can say confidently, with some level of uncertainty, that one is superior or inferior to the other, and their 95% confidence intervals don't include zero. But if you go back one other slide, when you were speaking a little informally about it, you said something to the effect of, the effect is 3 times larger for boys than girls. It might be that the point estimate that you have in the data, the magnitude happens to be 3 times larger, but the 95% or whatever the confidence intervals, they were still overlapping. So you can't actually say that this is larger for boys than girls. That you're confident that difference is true, because a good deal of the probability distributions are still overlapping. So I just say, like, parsing that might be really important, depending on who your audience is. And the second is with your co-author, just to be very careful about how you frame your response to reviewer feedback that might say that you're committing an ecological inferential fallacy, because one of your predictors is group membership.
Group membership.
I belong to a group in 2002 where my municipality has 28% internet coverage, and I've also provided my school grade as an individual. And you as a researcher are drawing a statistical inference about the relationship between a non-individual group characteristic and an individual characteristic that results from my test performance. And so in many parts of kind of inferential statistics, that would be a giant red flag. And so just with you and your co-author, just thinking about how you handle that and communicate that will be really important.
No, you are absolutely right. I mean, I was trying to be careful. Maybe I have
It's all about
thinking of interactions. But you are right that so when there is an overlap between different groups, we have to consider that, particularly because we are doing analysis separately. So one of the advantages of the sibling fixed effects is precisely that you can control for a lot of unobserved heterogeneity. But there is advantages that we have to do analysis within groups. Meaning that I have to be careful in terms of not making strong assumptions when comparing different groups.
Well, because you don't know if that individual in the municipality that has 28% internet coverage, you don't know if that person belongs to the 28% or the 62% or whatever's left. I can't do the math now. But like that information, if you don't have that on the individual level, but then the group predictor is in your model, it's a little bit strange, and it's something that you have to be careful of.
At the same time, theoretically, you could argue that when there is when you have a change in a municipality, even if we are not looking at aggregates, so this could affect individuals, the individual level. I mean,
maybe,
it depends how you unit of analysis is external, right? But you are in a context where you have higher chances of using high-speed internet, meaning that is a different context.
It just matters at the end of the day if you're talking about groups or if you're talking about individuals.
Good one,
and you just have to you have to pick.
I see. Group, yeah, thanks a lot.
Right, and that would be particularly relevant if some of the subgroups, particularly the minority groups, are concentrated geographically.
Yeah.
In some part of a municipality where
Mhm.
they might have actually no chance of having broadband
Yeah.
access.
And the classic sociological example in the US
Yep.
is literacy rates
Yeah.
and immigration, where you'll find that that immigrants might be more likely to settle in a state that has a very high, otherwise very high performance in English, and you might draw an inference that increasing immigration rates are correlated over time with something like literacy. But
Mhm.
actually, what's happening is it's disguising an individual phenomena.
Phenomenon.
Yeah, so you have to-
Not that connected.
Mm.
The other way around can be said in terms of the high achieving and particularly more privileged groups. It could be that maybe they are living in regions that have also higher access to internet. At the same time, so they use it more, and then more disadvantaged students, maybe they are not having access to internet because they don't have it. So they are, even if they are in an area that is spending, they are not using it. Of course, at the same time, we are controlling for this as much as we can with our sibling fixed effects model. We are also holding constant certain variations that give us some thought that we can account for this heterogeneity, but we have to be aware that it's not an experiment, a lab experiment.
It's okay.
I know, but yeah. Some
Sort of rolling to 2:00, so I might think we just know that today is very precious. Thank you very much. I wanted to highlight, because we went into this methodological nitty-gritty, but it's a
Yeah.
really cool paper.
It is an
And
amazing
not-
paper. It's
And
great.
not many people get access to registry data and are able to hold so many things.
Oh.
So.
no, that's what I mean.
Well, great commentary. I just wanted to not lose sight of that as well. So thank you very much. It was really a pleasure here. And I think if there are more questions, I noticed that today our chat was not quite as active as sometimes it is, but maybe people could reach out to you.
Yeah, exactly.
further
Yeah,
questions.
I will have coffee later and so on. But if you are interested in this research, or just drop me an email, or we can chat now a bit, maybe. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.